Live from the CK12 studios in beautiful Palo Alto, California, I'm Carl, a member of the CK12 team, and today we're joined by Laramie in our beautiful Denver, Colorado studios. I'll be running your webinar today called Common Core Math on CK12. We're so glad that you've joined us. The Certified Educator Program is not only underway, but it's beginning to wrap up as we finish tomorrow. We have a few reminders. I can still see that people are only broadcasting their comments to the panelists. If you'd like everybody who's in today's session to see it, please choose all panelists and attendees. We also have a resource page for today's session, and it's right there in the window there, tinyurl.com/CK12CCSS2019. As we said, today's session is called Common Core Math on CK12. Specifically, during this webinar, we'll be covering the following topics: added interactivity and PLIX. Both PLIX and customized embedded activities found directly within the text of CK12 Flexbooks. CK12 Common Core Flexbooks 2.0, accessing and exploring the many math books that are available, and coming soon, Math 6 and 7 on the Flexbook 2 platform. Finally, we'll be looking at strategies using Common Core interactive Flexbooks, these teacher guides and strategies for incorporating our brand new Flexbook both outside and during class time. We also want to find out if any of you have explored our book so far and what you're looking for in a Common Core Flexbook. You'll see a poll here in a few seconds that will prompt you to respond to two short questions. The first is, have you explored any CK12 Flexbooks with embedded interactives? Finally, what are you looking for in a Common Core Flexbook? And on that one, please select all that apply. So I'll pause for a few seconds to let you answer this poll. Note that you're welcome to select more than one answer for the second question. About a third of you have finished voting at this time. That's great. Let's get the other 60% of you. Some pretty interesting results here. All right, final 10 seconds so we can move along here. If you haven't finished voting, please do so at this time. All righty, let's go ahead and close the poll. And we can all see here that many of you have seen but not fully explored the Common Core Flexbooks. And what are you looking for in a Flexbook? Practice and interactivity are the two top big ones, but guided discovery examples, yes, kind of the usual here, but I like that you're going for practice, because the first thing I'll tell you is that in each lesson we have curated practice that goes along with each lesson. And Laramie's going to talk to you more about that. Let's move on then. So CK12's PLIX is our interactives, which PLIX stands for Play, Learn, Interact, and Explore, include descriptions, links to related reads, interactive frames, and challenge questions, which build a higher level thinking and open discussions. Our interactives, in addition to links to a full PLIX within the text, you'll see simple interactions, including options to adjust content, explore angles and graphs, drag and drop answer choices, and to give students more instant feedback. These interactives can be found in our new Common Core Interactive Flexbooks on the 2.0 platform when we bring together the best of CK12 right in the lesson, and then using our intelligence to provide a personalized journey for each student. Currently, you can access the published books in two ways. First, you'll find these in our new Flexbook 2.0 platform directly from the Explore menu by choosing Common Core State Standards Math and clicking on Flexbooks, or Subjects from the menu homepage browse by choosing Math by Level, or scrolling to the bottom of the page and choosing Common Core Math. So lots of different ways to get to these great books. These new books were designed with the Common Core philosophy in mind and built to optimize the power of CK12's 2.0 platform. Not only are they correlated to content standards, but they include a combination of active learning, interactives, examples, and review. And some of you might be saying, but my state doesn't do Common Core. That's a nasty word here. Well, for those of you who don't do Common Core, often you're Common Core adjacent is what I would call you. Because, let's take examples of Idaho and Alaska. Both of these states have state standards now, which are either like 98, 99, or even 100% of what Common Core is, but they just can't call it that because the word has become politicized. So what I like to offer people is that these new books are truly the best ways of learning, whether you're coming from a state that embraces Common Core or does not, or from a country that, of course, you wouldn't even be doing Common Core, or you're using the International Baccalaureate or IGCSE. Wherever you come from, there are some great lessons in these books, and these will be the books that you want to start with if you're choosing new content on CK12. So with that, we are going to go to our studios in Colorado. And Laramie, can you please show us more about these books?
I think I can handle that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Laramie, and as Carl said, I'm calling to you from Colorado. I've been with CK12 for quite some time now, and I manage the CK12 math program. All the math content is kind of under my purview here. So I want to show you some of the neat things we've been doing with our Common Core math in the last year or so. And I'm going to start with high school and work my way down through middle school. My goal is also to show you some of the upcoming content that'll be released here very shortly and give you a picture for where CK12 is going. So I'm going to start from our CK12 homepage. Hopefully everybody can see that clearly at this point. I'm going to demonstrate each of the different ways that Carl mentioned that you can access our CK12 Common Core content. So our first way here is to go up to the Explore menu at the top navigation bar. I'm going to click on Common Core Math here, the CCSS Math link. And then I'm going to choose Flexbooks. And under Flexbooks, you'll see we have all of our science and math Common Core, and then what will be our new science Flexbooks too, as they are continue to be updated. I'm going to start here with Algebra 1. And here's our new Algebra 1 Common Core Flexbook 2. Now, the really neat things about the Flexbook 2 platform are the ways that the platform allows us to integrate all of the resources that CK12 has offered for quite a while, but bring them all together into a single package. We tied all of that new capability into new books that were specifically written with the Common Core philosophy in mind. So although we've had resources that certainly allowed a teacher to teach from a Common Core standpoint for quite some time, these new books are written specifically to really strongly encourage students to do exploratory learning, to benefit from that productive failure concept, lots of Socratic type questions. And I think, again, as Carl pointed out, I think that even if you weren't a specifically Common Core school, most teachers, I would say, agree that that's a very strong way to teach, to try and get students to really be engaged with the material and to get them to understand why the material they're learning is important to them. Have them find formulas for themselves, have them explore the content and see why they're given certain bits of material and certain resources. So we're just going to pick a couple of sample lessons here. You'll see right from the very beginning, when a student clicks on a given lesson, there's a couple of options. The default next path is to click the Start button, which we'll go to in just a second. But if you have any experience with CK12 in the past, you've also noticed that CK12 offers lots of different kinds of modalities, supports that allow students to extend our written lessons with other resources. Now with the Flexbook 2 platform, those resources, specifically a curated cross-section of them that specifically work well with the given read, are offered right alongside with that read. So you can click on any of these things here to open up those other resources as a student and review those, or you can go straight into the lesson, which is where we're going to head now. Click that Start button, and you'll see that the written lesson now has lots of embedded activities for students to do, not just as text with graphics and so forth, but also like the CK12 Plix, for instance, that are actually part of the lesson now. A student can be reading along, going through different kinds of those very Socratic questions, and then get to an interactive that's actually part of the lesson, they click on the launch button, and that Plix will open full screen for them. They answer the questions associated with the Plix, use the interactivity to help them answer those questions, and play with a given concept. And then once they're done, they simply close that window, and they're returned right back where they left off in the lesson. And you'll see that many of our lessons have multiple different Plix in them. This particular first one, I think, only has that one. But then we also have these new, what we call embedded interactives, which are like the interactivity part of a Plix, but they're actually custom made for this specific lesson, and they don't open any other screen. They actually are part of the text, in line with the text, and they're directly related to the content above and below them. So you'll see in the lesson, it'll specifically say something like, answer the questions here, or use the interactive to explore something, and the students will be able to actually manipulate that interactive directly in the lesson without having to go anywhere else. They can, in this case, adjust the slope of a line or the y-intercept and see how those things actually affect the formula or the equation of a function directly here as it's part of the lesson. I'm going to also show you down here on the bottom right, every one of the new Flexbook 2 lessons have that built-in View Practice button. You've probably, again, been familiar with CK12 Practice in the past, but our Adaptive Practice, for those of you who haven't used it, it's pretty slick. It allows you to assign a practice session to a student, and then the computer, our system, our smart system, actually adapts the level of the questions to each student based on how well they're doing. And as the student continues through the practice, it updates how well they're doing with a successive, or what's the word I'm looking for, ascending skill level. So as they answer questions, right or wrong, the system evaluates the difficulty of the question, whether or not the question answer is correct, and then uses that to build a skill level. It starts out to be determined. If I get a few questions, I'm just going to randomly click buttons here. Then after they get a few questions answered, it'll start to scale up to show how well their skill level is increasing. So all these things are now part of the what we used to call the read, the modality that is based on text in our new books. So I'm going to show you now, let's take a couple of looks at some of the same content from a couple of our other topics here. This time I'm going to access the content from, let's go from the Browse menu here. So any of the math by level topics, except for grade 1 through 5, will be directly related to our Common Core books by default. So let's go take a look at the geometry book here. Now the geometry book was actually our very first interactive CCSS book. So it has a few differences from some of our other content. The geometry book has more embedded Plix, those full screen opening Plixes, and fewer of the actual inline interactives, generally speaking, and also has a number, I would say, more videos than some of our other books. But you can see, very similar to the algebra here, a number of the inline opening up Plixes here that, by the way, can be assigned individually to your students. If you haven't done that before, certainly you can assign using the Assign button up here that assigns the read and the associated practice to your students. But in addition to that, these individual Plixes can be assigned to your students as a teacher, and you can get a separate response for them in your teacher dashboard, letting you know that the student completed all the questions in that Plix. Here's another one of those inline interactives here, having a student translate a square and show that as long as all the points go the same distance and direction, that it maintains the same shape. And as you can see, this is very Common Core, this idea of exploring translation from the standpoint of similar figures, the standpoint of rigid motion. That's a very Common Core way of teaching this. And then finally, let's go from a high school standpoint, let's go take a look at the Algebra 2. I think we can go from up here, yep, under the Subjects menu. We can go up here and click Algebra 2 here also. This will take us to the Common Core Algebra as well. And just again, we'll grab a random lesson here. Algebra 2, again, has all of those associated interactives. I will also point out later when I'm talking about teacher resources, there are a number of references in the teacher guides for high school that suggest that students use other modalities in CK12 to support the reads. You'll find that all of these curated modalities are the ones that are referenced. So now it's much easier for you to tell your students, if you want them to specifically go watch a video on solving rational equations with this lesson, any additional resource that's referenced in the teacher's guide will be an easy click for the students because it'll be in that related content, which, by the way, in the read is also accessible from the top right-hand button here. Related content shows you all those same things that show up at the beginning of the lesson. Again, very similar to the Algebra 1 and the geometry, a few of the embedded inline interactives that support the content directly. And then in the Algebra 2, you'll find that there's some review questions, written questions at the end of the lesson. The geometry has some of these also. The Algebra 1 is more specifically interactive, but there are some additional teacher resources for printable types of questions for all three of those. Okay, now on to my personal favorite of our published content right now, Grade 8 Math. Our middle school Common Core books have become kind of a flagship for showing how interactive digital learning can really be different, very different from just digitally supported printable PDFs or some other way of digitizing a given or an existing textbook. The Middle School Math 8 book was written specifically to showcase that ability. So you'll find not only are there many additional resources, there's also access directly to your teacher's resource. If you are a teacher, I'm signed in as a teacher here, so I see this lesson plan. This is actually the related content from the full teacher's guide or teacher's edition of this book. This particular lesson plan is the content that refers to this specific lesson. So if I, as a teacher, customize this Math 8 book for my students, I don't have to go re-customizing the teacher edition to get it to match. All my additional content that I need as a teacher will go with it. Again, we'll talk about that more in the teacher's resource section of this. So if I click on Start here, you'll see, and this looks very similar, I think, to the algebra, but you'll find that in the Math 8, the lesson text is definitely useful. It definitely provides background information and supportive information for all of the resources in there, but that you can actually have a student complete all of the main learning objectives specifically just by doing interactivity. So your students that may have challenges with reading or just challenges concentrating on reading for any significant period of time, all you have to do is assign them the individual interactives, and the interactives have questions that go along with them and support you as a teacher with feedback. So if the students, for instance, they click on, say, this interactive here, and it tells them how to change the positions of the vertices of this this triangle here for the the transversal lines. If I start answering questions here as a student, I get immediate feedback that tells me whether or not that answer is correct, and also why it is or isn't correct. And then I get a chance to try it again. So these inline questions, as we call them, are much more formative quiz types. They're questions that help the student to understand the material and give them immediate direct feedback to all of the thinking that they're doing along the way. And this book is chock full of them. Lots of different kinds of questions. We have fill in the blank, we have drag and drop, we have multiple choice and select all. We even have a few short answer questions that really help challenge the student to understand the material presented in the interactive, not just to play with it as some pretty buttons that change things on the screen, but to really see why they're given any given interactive. So let's go. I'm going to show you one more lesson in this book, and then I'm going to play just a little bit and give you a sneak peek of some of the upcoming content. I know we had some people that were interested in Math 6 and Math 7. Here's another Math 8 lesson here. Sorry, my internet is burning quickly with my video share. But you'll see again, we have the embedded interactive and then the questions go along with it right down through the lesson. And these all are part of the lesson for the students. There's nothing else to add. As soon as you assign the lesson to the students, they get all these questions at the same time. Also, from the teacher's standpoint, you'll find that every one of these lessons has an end of lesson quiz, which you can assign to the students. These are summative quizzes, and you can get a separate report for these as a teacher, so you can assign the lesson itself, and then you can also assign the quiz individually if you want to. So these aren't just summative, aren't just formative questions, but actually challenge the student to answer correctly. They only get one shot for these, but then you can kind of get a picture for what did they actually understand from the material that they were given. All right, so now last thing here before I hand back over to Carl, I'm going to sneak in just a quick example of Math 7 This is a picture of our Math 7 book that I am planning on releasing very, very soon. I was hoping to have it released actually first of this week. We're trying to finalize some of the typo cleanup and that sort of thing. Certainly any teachers that want to use this content this fall and would like access to it, if you contact us directly, I'm happy to share the link with you. But you'll find, again, very, very interactive, lots of resources for students to immediately interact with. As a teacher, you're in a great position to assign, say, an interactive and the associated questions to a whole class. And then because those questions have immediate feedback, you can go from student to student and see how they're doing and not have to answer the little quick questions like, why was this wrong? Or what did I click wrong here? That kind of thing the system handles for you. And then finally, one quick peek at the Middle School Math 6. Again, almost done. All the interactives for this book are complete. All the online questions have been written. We're kind of in the final stages of cleanup. Same situation as the Math 7. If you as a teacher need access to this so that you can start your planning, just ask. I'm happy to share with you. I just want to make sure before we put it on the homepage that everything is as clean as it can possibly be. I think you will also find as a teacher that the Math 6, 7, and 8 books kind of increase in our expectation of student understanding. So from a grade 6 standpoint, everything is incorporated in those interactives. By the time you get to Math 8, there's some more text, some more reading that definitely supports the learning. In Math 6, really, virtually all the learning occurs in interactivity or activities for the students, something that has immediate feedback, or something that you can do in class as a teacher. And then the final last kind of fun thing I have to share with you is that Algebra 1 book that I showed you at first is going to be updated. In fact, it already is. We're, again, just doing cleanup with these same inline questions so that the Algebra 1 content will also be immediately feedback incorporated for you as teachers. And I think that covers most of the main content here. Do we have any questions that I should respond to right away, Carl?
Absolutely. I just want to say I taught math for 17 years, and these books just blow me away. They, I think, are so engaging for students, but more importantly, like what we're seeing here on the screen, to get that kind of feedback during the lesson is just amazing. So, all right, let's pull up some questions from our users. Let's start down in the elementary grades first. Kind of the first question is, what are the grade levels 1 through 5 based on? And then why aren't the grades 1 through 5 not aligned to Common Core like the older grades?
It's a great question. Our current elementary content is based on the interactive Brain Genie questions and related videos that CK12 has offered for quite some time. We don't have significant written content for the 1 through 5 simply because we believe that there's a lot more in-class activity that occurs for students at that grade, and we want to continue to support teachers in the best way that we can. Right now, the resources that we have, we believe, are more applicable to the older grades, but the videos and the questions that we offer at the elementary level, we think are very good support materials for teachers who do the kinds of direct activities with their students in class. So we do have plans to explore more middle school or elementary content in the future. But at this point, all the elementary content that we offer is kind of short, quick support lessons for other resources.
And there's a follow-up question here, kind of when are like Flexbook 2.0 elementary grade math books going to be available? And I think the kind of simple answer to that is we are not planning on creating that content ourselves. Instead, we're hoping to find a school or a district partner that wants to create that. And then we provide the platform and help with the interactives and the practice and things like that. So we bring what we've become experts at by giving you this intelligent platform. So if you or your district or have any interest in developing that with us, please do contact us. Email us at jumpstart@ck12.org, and we would love to have further conversations about that. All right, next, Laramie, there's some questions about, people are very excited about Math 6 and Math 7. When will these be available?
Let me tell you, as the guy who's in charge of getting these things put out, there is nobody who is more eager to have them released to the wild, so to speak, than I am. I really have been just working late into the evening, literally, on a daily basis trying to get these finalized. I definitely expect Math 7 to be out before the end of this month. I would hope to say that we're going to have it out early next week. And I certainly think that Math 6 will be released to the wild, again, strange term there, I suppose, by the middle of next month. And in the meantime, any teachers that do want to start getting ready for classes this fall, I'm happy to give you access to it. Again, all the content is there. It's just a matter of sort of making it, polished so that as we release it to everyone, there aren't any immediate questions about where's this particular link or why is this text color different, that sort of thing.
All right, so just to review that, so we're hoping to get Math 7 out in the next week or so, or 2 weeks, and we're hoping to get Math 6 out by mid-August. So let people know, in your schools and in your districts that these groundbreaking books that are interactive and engaging will be available for the next school year. And we would love to hear feedback from you and your peers about them, feedback from your students, because we really think these are our flagship products. All right, there's another question here, Laramie, is how is the Common Core Algebra Flexbook 2.0 different from the other algebra book, the original Flexbook available on the website?
That's an excellent question. Actually, there's two huge ways. I would say the most immediately obvious way is that the Algebra 1 Common Core book is in our Flexbook 2 platform, and the Algebra 1 Concept Collection book is still in our Flexbook 1 platform. Now, we are working on adapting the Common Core or the Concept Collection book to the Flexbook 2, so that won't be a forever difference. But I would say from an immediate standpoint, that's the most obvious one. But the books are significantly different. There isn't just like a little bit of shuffling going on. The Algebra 1 Common Core book was written from the ground up by a completely different author who started from zero, who was particularly interested in incorporating real-world examples of how things are used in algebra and real-world activities for the students to actually play with and see why equations are the way they are. And the Algebra 1 Concept Collection is, I think, a little bit more of a classic exploration of how algebra works in more of a classroom setting, working with expressions and equations and functions, working with, in fact, I would say even fewer models. There's significantly less graphing and so forth in the Algebra 1 Concept Collection than there is in the Algebra 1 Common Core book. So just as an overall picture, I would say the Algebra 1 Common Core book is dramatically more interactive in many ways, and the Algebra 1 Concept Collection is more applicable to sort of grab and go short little bits of supported material that you may want to use to add to other resources that you're already taking advantage of.
All right, and finally, Laramie, our users just want things they use in their class. So any plans for pre-calc appearing on the Flexbook 2.0 platform with all those great features?
That's another good question. And yes, actually, the same thing as I'm going to say with the others, there actually is in process. What we're doing is not only just adapting the book to the 2.0 platform so that it has the access to some of the other insights and so forth, but we're also creating some of those inline questions and adding all of the related modalities, the curated related modalities. That is in process. All of the chosen related modalities for sort of the draft version have been selected. The book has already been converted to 2.0. So again, we're looking at a matter of weeks before that is also live on our CK12 platform. This is a busy fall.
Laramie is one, and his whole team is amazing, and they do such a good job and have so much on their plate right now. So we're getting our high quality content out to all of you as quickly as possible. There was a really interesting question about getting a report of the students' performance in inline questions. And what I'll say to that is currently we don't offer, that's a learning tool currently, and we don't offer the teacher any results on that, but it is in what we're working on as part of our teacher insights, so that even during the lesson, you'll get feedback from our platform saying, these 5 students are struggling. Would you like me to create this kind of fill in the gap assignment for these students? So that's the kind of thing that's coming up in the future, in the next year, for teacher insights. But currently, we don't give the teacher feedback on the inline questions, but the students get great feedback as part of reading the answers of what is there. So, all right, well, I think I'm going to, Laramie, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal back the screen here, and we're going to continue on our journey through these books, and we're going to talk about strategies here. So let's go now. Now that you've seen the book, let's talk about some resources and strategies for using these Common Core books. For each one of our Common Core interactive books, we've included a teacher's guide to help with using these resources. And these guides include pacing, vocabulary, and text examples, lesson objectives, standards, and other resources. Thinking about ways to use these books, let's talk some strategies that might be useful. So in class, we have here inline questions, which we've talked about just now, instant feedback. And this is really good because our Math 678 books have them built in from the beginning. Laramie just mentioned that Algebra 1's getting them. And these are great ways for students to be able to clarify little issues as they pop up throughout the lesson. Because I know that when I'm standing in front of a class of 35 students, I can't get around to every student multiple times during the lesson. The interactives as part of these lessons, you can have the students do them individually or with partners, but they make a really strong lesson. And then we have these work it out problems, and they could be used as a warm-up or as an introduction to a topic, but it's kind of it helps them through the steps and really encourages them to have active learning. With the assignments, remember, when you assign a lesson in Flexbook 2.0, you're assigning the lesson along with the aligned practice. So this is now a package deal, let's call it. And a lot of teachers are using the students' a practice on CK12 as the homework. Kids actually really enjoy using and doing the practice on their mobile device, like their smartphone. And so it is something that does require internet access. And I know that I've seen some great conversations in the cafe under the Jumpstart for Education, for educators, where they've talked about what do we do for that small percentage of students that don't have internet access at home. And one of the things, like in Gretna, Nebraska, they actually issue a MiFi device for the students that don't have internet at home. And we've got them working on adaptive practice using the MiFi device. Also have the students look at some of the related modalities. If they're not understanding what's happening in the lesson, by going to related content, they'll be able to look at other modalities, other ways of learning, which are going to help them learn this concept. Student resources and notes. We have talked throughout this program about the ability to highlight and note take using those digital features. These are really powerful ways to get our students interpreting academic text. And we know this is a challenge for many of our learners, especially second language learners. You can even have your students build GeoGebra interactives, which can then be embedded in the lesson. And I think if you're looking for an extension activity, maybe to give some of your students who are a little further down the learning pathway already, have them build some GeoGebra interactives, which then can become part of your lesson, built by students for other students. You can use CK12 to differentiate. The number one tool for differentiation is adaptive practice, because it identifies the level that the student's at, and then it builds on that level. And it adjusts to the student knowledge and its progress. And I think it's the best way for each of you to provide personalized learning for all your students. Using the CK12 lessons and the Flexbook 2.0 platform, you are offered an environment to kind of implement blended learning. And what this does is, while some groups are working on some activity in the lesson in CK12, you can do direct instruction with a group that maybe is not connecting digitally that day, and they need something kind of in the more like real world. But the idea with the CK12 lesson is we offer a variety of ways to learn. And the way I call it is, go learn it how you want. I don't care how you learn it, just learn it and then do the adaptive practice to make sure that you've learned it correctly. All right, so I think, Laramie, you're going to go and do a little bit more demo for us and show us some more exciting things about the Common Core books.
I think I can handle that. So what I'm going to do here is move to working on some of our specific teacher resources. And here we go. Hopefully you can see my screen again now. I'm back at the home page here. What I'm going to do is kind of do sort of a parallel review of the content that I showed you a minute ago. Not exactly, but kind of similar. And in this case, I'm going to go to the teacher side of everything that we saw as a student before. So let's again go up to the Explore menu first. And we're going to go to Common Core and choose Flexbooks, and then Algebra 1. Now, all of our Common Core books have this sort of title page that gives you a quick sort of an introduction to what the book is about, what the reasons for using this book and so forth. And just underneath that, you'll see that there's a link to Teacher Edition. If I click on that link, it's going to take me to, for the high school books, a teacher's guide that gives you resources as far as how to implement the material that's in the student version of the book. And you're going to see that there's a kind of an unusual layout here. We've taken all of the content so that the numbers of the chapters match the student version here. So, the third chapter goes to chapter 3 in the student version and so forth, which means that the overall content that views the book as a whole is actually down at the end instead of near the beginning. So we're going to go down and start there, actually. This shows us the scope and sequence for the entire Algebra 1 lesson. Now, the first thing that we come across here in this teacher's resource is sort of a description of how the class itself is laid out, the different kinds of resources that are available in each lesson, and how we recommend that you might want to implement those things with your students. There's also kind of a quick glossary for the terminology that we use at CK12 for the different kinds of modalities. Our READ modality is that sort of core written lesson that hosts everything else. And we have our interactives and our Plix interactives that the students use to actually manipulate. And often there are questions that go along with those. In the middle school books, again, we have those in digital form, and Algebra 1 coming out very soon. In Algebra 2 and Geometry, they still tend to be more of a printed resource. Videos, of course, other kinds of printables that you can hand out to your students. The adaptive practice, which is that button in the lower right, which offers you the ability to give your students kind of that ongoing review, and gives you as a teacher a report of what they've done whenever that student turns it in, to show that they actually completed 10 correct questions and which questions they answered and how they answered them. So you can get a good review of where your student's understanding level is. Also, in these Common Core books, we have many custom quizzes. CK12 has a great ability to build your own quizzes as a teacher. That's literally just point and click. You have access to all of the questions that already exist in our adaptive practice library, and the ability to add custom questions that you write yourself, and then just click with a little checkbox to choose which questions you want to add to a given quiz. In these books, we've already done that for you in many locations so that you actually have resources for a kind of summative assessment tool as well, and kind of a final exam, so to speak, for each. Sometimes it's a unit, sometimes it's multiple different lessons in a single chapter, sometimes it's a chapter, but it gives you the ability to sort of get a bird's eye view of where your student's understanding is. Also, you'll find here there's a very small link. This link here, this solutions button, shows you access to the solutions for chapter assessments. These are the printable assessments that you can hand out to your students, and allows you access as a teacher to see the solutions to them without having to work them out. Fortunately, we kind of hid this down in the middle of the teacher's guide. Obviously, we can't guarantee that students don't have access to them, so that's up to you whether or not you want to use them, but we try to make it at least a little more difficult for students to stumble across. There's also quite a bit of suggested best practices for how to make use of the lessons as a teacher. And then here's the overall scope and sequence for the book in total. You'll see Chapter 1 has a total of 21 instructional periods. That includes 2 kind of bigger quizzes and a one-day chapter assessment for a total of 22 instructional periods. Chapter 2, 15 instructional periods plus a one-day assessment for a total of 16, and so on. And then there's a final quiz at the end of the book. There's semester assessments, suggestions for midterm projects, and so forth. So this is kind of the overall book view. Now let's go back to sort of a chapter level. Let's pick, say, Chapter 2 here. Again, you'll notice that the individual lessons that go along with the student book are the same numbered, and then at the end we have kind of the overall view of the chapter. So let's go there. You'll see that we have a big kind of top-down view of what the resources are for each individual lesson in the chapter. So the first lesson link here would be for Lesson 1, number types. You'll see it addresses this particular Common Core standard. These are the Plix interactives that we think are most immediately related to that content. And here's a link to adaptive practice. In this case, you'll see if there's a custom quiz It's actually titled quiz. So here's one of those custom quizzes that we built, and this one would be for lesson 3. And then there's also a link here to supplemental exercises and the solutions for those supplemental exercises. These are printables that you can send home with your students in case they don't have access to some kind of a digital resource. This particular lesson is expected to be 2 instructional periods. The next one is 3. Here's one that's even 4. So obviously these are detailed, long lessons that we expect students to get a lot of content out of. And then finally, let's drill down to the individual lesson level. I'm just going to pick, again, a random one here. At the individual lesson level, you'll see the specific standard written out, any vocabulary that we believe is related to that, specific learning objectives that we've identified for this lesson, and then any of the mathematical practices, the 8 standards from a mathematical practice that we feel are particularly addressed in this lesson. And then finally, here's sort of an agenda walkthrough, just that you can use as kind of a rough estimate for how long things are expected to take for you and your students based on those instructional periods that we sort of broke each lesson into. Like I said, this one was 2 periods. There's some that are 3 or even 4. But it gives you an idea of what kinds of things you're likely to cover in a given day with your students. And then finally, as I was having the authors compose these books, I asked them to take notes when they were designing specific questions, specific activities, of what their goals as an author were for incorporating those things into their materials. It kind of gives you a rare insight to how that author's mind was working as they were writing individual content, so that you can really get a feel for what the goal of a given activity or an interactive or a set of questions were. And this, I think, is just kind of a neat insight as a teacher to see what your real overall goals for each individual part of that lesson are. Okay, let's head back to the home page here. We're going to kind of more quickly zip through the geometry and algebra 2. Again, let's try the subjects page here. Go to the algebra 2. That same teacher edition link here on the home page, or on the title page for the student book. Again, you'll see it organized very similarly. We have all the lessons in order so that they match. And then the book overview at the end. Similar content, telling you how the book works, what the different resource or different terminology we use at CK12 happens to be, an example of how to use the book, description of what's in each individual lesson and how long the instructional periods are, how many instructional periods there are per chapter, that sort of thing, when a semester project occurs, and then just some examples for where to find other projects. Again, very similar to the Algebra 1. At the chapter level and the lesson level, also very similar. You'll find that the layout works the same. So then finally, let's go take a look at the geometry. Here's the geometry link on the home page. We're going to go to the teacher's edition here. The biggest difference between the geometry guide and the others would be the fact that there is a separate section assigned to the midterm and final projects in geometry, because geometry tends to be a little easier to make a hands-on sort of a subject. So there are some significant projects in there. If you as a teacher want to do a project-based curriculum, there's a lot of resources for incorporating activities for students in class. And you'll see that there are some slightly different kinds of terminology, slightly different kinds of things that are done in this book. There's some specific questions that we think are particularly important for students to work on, and those will always be highlighted in the teacher's guide. Here's that link to the chapter assessment solutions, kind of like in the algebra books. And then the overview, again, very similar. So I think that gives you kind of an idea for how the high school book teacher resources are laid out. Let me go show you a couple examples of our middle school. It's a different layout. Now in the middle school books, we actually have a teacher's version of the text. So if I click here on teacher's edition, I get that same table of contents like we have on the others. And why is this? It's interesting. Oh, I know. I click on one of these here, go take a look at any one of these links just for a random lesson, and you'll see this is the same text that appears in the student book, but it also has this additional text in purple that's written to you as a teacher and has the agenda for the lesson right near the top. Now, many of these lessons also have a specific, like I said, end of lesson quiz, and you'll see a link up here at the top that links you to that end of lesson quiz as well. Description of why the warm-up is designed the way it is, what the student is going to do. Often there'll be a little additional questions that you can kind of use to incorporate discussion in your classroom. And then you get a picture of the interactives that the students will be working on so that you can see how they work. You can play with it yourself if you like. But instead of that interactive question, click through it and try again kind of thing as a teacher, you actually see a written out version of each question and the correct answer. So that as a teacher, you don't have to click through every question to see what's there, or go looking to see when a student says, what does this word mean? Or what are they asking on question 2? All that type of content is immediately accessible to you as a teacher throughout each of the lessons in Math 8. And then here's that link to the end of lesson quiz I mentioned. You can actually assign this directly to your students. You can preview it and see the 10 questions yourself if you want, or you can click on the link here or the link down below where it says practice page and see as a teacher where you can assign that directly to your class so that you can get a separate report for those things as a teacher. And I think, I wanted to show you also one other nifty, I mentioned to you earlier that in the middle school books, you can access those lessons individually. So if I go to the student edition here, and instead of clicking on teacher's edition, I just click on a random lesson. Click on it and then don't close it. That'll work better. Here's that lesson plan link I mentioned. Now, as a teacher, I see this. If I was logged in as a student account, this wouldn't show up. So if, for instance, you only see these 2 resources and you're looking at, Middle School Math 8, Section 3.3, it's probably because you're signed in as a student, that you have a student account. You'll need to go up and change your account information under settings to make sure that you're signed in as a teacher. Then you'll see this lesson plan. If I click on that lesson plan, there's that teacher's version of the lesson that has all the typed out questions and all the additional materials that I can use as a teacher to support my instruction. And I think that's it. Did I miss anything that you can think of, or any questions that we should tackle here, Carl?
We actually have a couple that we'd love to get answered. One of our users today is saying they can't locate the lesson level scope and sequence for geometry. Where's it located?
Sure. So let's go to that geometry book and go to the teacher edition link at the top of the student version. And then if we click on Chapter 1 Pacing Guides, and then click on any given lesson here, you'll see that we have this focus standards, the vocabulary, the learning outcomes, and then that, sort of that agenda for the lesson that says what the links are to the individual written lesson, the read, the additional modalities. These are PLIX modalities here, link to the adaptive practice, and then the end of lesson quiz, that custom quiz that appears down here, and the questions and solutions for additional resources. And every one of the lessons in geometry works the same way. They all have their own correlated teacher's guide lesson. You can click through it just like you do the student guide if you want, lesson 1, 2, 3, and so forth.
Alrighty, and then our next question is, how does CK12 support multi-step performance tasks?
Oh, geez, this is a great question. This is a fun one. Let me show you a nifty example, and I'm going to cheat again. I'm going to show you first the existing live. So this is one of my favorite lessons in CK12. This is Algebra 1, Common Core book, and we're going to go into lesson 311. It talks specifically about the quadratic model. And what's neat about this this particular lesson, I think it's just one of the more obvious examples of the idea where learning builds on learning. So we have specifically, kind of an introduction here. Greg pilots the speedboat on a lake. He's accelerating at 3 meters per second. And it talks about how they graph his acceleration versus his buddy that's got another speedboat, and they're going to race. And the students play with this interactive here to see how, Greg's boat compares to Jillian's boat based on who gets the head start and how fast they're accelerating and so forth. Then we move down and the questions get a little more complex, and we add in another sort of a factor here. And then we move down and the questions get a little more complex. We talk a little about that graph, and then we add another factor. So this is like, by the time we get down to the third interactive here, there's quite a bit to play with. We can change, who gets the head start, how long they're running, when do they actually cross, who accelerates faster, all these different functions that allow the student to play with what each part of the function means, but kind of increase the complexity step by step by step. Now, each of these questions here, obviously, as you can see, are a little bit more complex. They're written for high school. They're not written for middle school. But what we have discovered is, regardless of a student's age, they do like that idea of that immediate feedback. So again, as I said, I'm going to cheat. Here is the link for that same lesson in the currently being reviewed version of Algebra 1. And you'll see that we have many of those same work it out questions, but then also have a number of those immediate feedback questions so the students can interact with the built-in interactive and then get some feedback on why each of the things that they're studying are the way they are, and get that, that sort of immediate check on their understanding and support for their understanding as well. So again, this is coming up very soon. It's just under final review.
Great. Then there was another question. You were showing us some stuff for the math in high school that was kind of a teacher's overview of the course. Is that available for the grade 6 through 8 Flexbooks?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry I didn't bring that up. Let me go back. I'm going to go to the Math 8 book here. And we're going to go to the Teacher's Edition link. This one, of course, doesn't have a direct corollary from that where you can click on the lesson plan because there isn't the lesson for it. But again, at the very end of the book here, this chapter 11 does not exist in the student book. But if you click on the curriculum guide at the end of the teacher's version, you'll see here's that overview, that scope and sequence, let you know what the prerequisite standards are, because it's a Math 8 book here, the Math 7 associated standards, and then the standards that are focused on in the individual Math 8 lesson, the number of chapters and lesson in each book. And then there's also the lessons by standard. So if you need to target a specific standard in 8th grade, these are the lessons that specifically reference that standard. And also the overall focus standards, how much of our focus is on major standards, how many is on supporting standards, and so forth. And how many of you that work with a district need access to the kind of the overall review of what the content covers. So we do have that. We do not have the overview agenda where it says, you know, this is this many lesson periods and so forth, because in the middle school math, we generally assume that each individual lesson is expected to be a specific class period. The Algebra 1, for instance, like I said, some of those lessons are 3, 4, I think there's even one that's 5 class periods because they're very complex lessons, whereas the ones in middle school, all of the middle school books, they're all written from the standpoint of expecting there to be a 50-minute class period. So the only agenda for those is sort of at that class level, and then you can just look at the TOC to see how many days class periods you expect there to be in each individual chapter.
All right, Laramie, that's great. Before we wrap things up here, I do want to, somebody asked questions about like IB books and how they're excited that they're going to be able to take some of our content here and convert it into addressing the IB standards. But I do want to show you here, I'm going to go ahead and steal the screen back, Laramie, from you. And I think that what I'd love to show first is here we are on the home page, and coming under here, we have our schools page right here. So under the Explore menu, we've got schools, and under the schools, we have all the list of the states, but under I is international. And I think that there's some really great stuff here. And I want to move all the way down to a inter-community school in Zurich. And they've created books for the International Baccalaureate MYP, Middle Years Program, grades 5 through 10. And I think that they did a really great job of capturing a lot of what the International Baccalaureate uses as their kind of guiding principles. I will say, though, that these books were not written in the Flexbook 2.0 platform, so they don't take advantage of all the, you know, personalized learning and the intelligence that we currently offer. But they might be a great place to get some ideas of things of somebody who's already thought deeply. And Eric and his team there in Zurich have done an amazing job with these books. And so it's a great way to do it. The other thing that I really encourage you to do, so let's look at geometry. We can go look on our site using the search bar, but more importantly, you can search for just Flexbook 2.0s. So of course, Laramie's great interactive geometry book is there, and then there's geometry in some of these other books. The other thing that you can see here is we have our community contributed tab where people have taken our book and then done magical things to it on their own. So you might want to go in and look at some of these other ones, and if you do the filter of Flexbooks 2.0, This then helps focus on the newest learning platform. But I want to make sure you all take advantage of our search bar, and of course, even stuff like history. And I can look at on the website, I just want to see Flexbook 2.0 and look at community contributed. And there's a lot of great history books available here in the 2.0 platform that have already been made by our users around the world. So make sure that you are familiar both with the schools page and then searching with the filter Flexbook 2.0. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to go ahead and reshare my keynote then, and let's wrap this up. We will stay on. Somebody had asked for a demo of trying to get add more sections or lessons into a chapter. We'll be glad to demo that here in a few seconds, and we will be staying on and answering any remaining questions. As long as you guys ask questions, we'll stay around here. So coming up this afternoon, I will be leading a teaching strategy session. If you haven't seen this one yet, I've heard from a lot of participants of the Certified Educator Program that it's a really useful session of how to implement it immediately in your classroom on the first day of class. Some really great strategies for using CK12 on a pretty basic level. Then tomorrow morning, our final session of the Certified Educator Program. For those of you who haven't seen it, that Katie and Sonia will be leading the CK12 Simulations and Plix Interactive, where this is one of our many secret sauces around here. I always say adaptive practice is a secret sauce. Well, our interactives are pretty amazing ways to engage and get our students to explore and deeply think about a concept. So if you hadn't had a chance to watch it the other 2 times they've presented this, feel free to join us tomorrow morning at this time slot, 9 a.m. California time. Reminder too that we have coming up today CK12 for independent schools. So specifically, our case studies have been amazing over the last 2 weeks. We've done homeschoolers, we've done whole districts adopting, and today we're focusing on CK12 for independent schools. I believe it's at the 1 p.m., the 11 a.m. time slot. So coming up here in just over an hour. Join us to find out how independent schools are using CK12 and why they're choosing CK12, and kind of figuring out what's the best quality content for their students. As always, we love your feedback, and I know that it takes a few minutes to fill it out, but it helps make us think about what we're presenting to you and ways to improve it. So as always, tinyurl.com/CK12feedback 2019. You also have access to a resource page, as we mentioned at the top of the hour. Please go to download that, print it out, and keep it near your work area to remind you of all the great things you've learned about the Common Core math books on the Flexbook 2.0 platform. There is an assignment for today's work because this is one of our official live sessions. So go in and take a look at the assignment. As always, the questions are previewed in the lesson in the Flexbook 2.0 CEP 2019 book. So make sure you go look at those questions first, because once you start the quiz, you need to complete the quiz all in that one session. You can't split it apart. And that's it from our friends here. And we are going to go and address a couple things, Laramie, the remaining questions. But we really thank you all. And I encourage you to please pay it forward. Can you send a link to the Common Core books to people that you know that could benefit by them? These are our flagship products. They've worked so hard to make them outstanding. And I think anybody who teaches math is going to be pretty blown away by what's being offered here. And the great news is, because it's part of the Flexbook 2.0 platform, we keep adding on more and more intelligence to help students and teachers learn this better. So with that, Laramie, I think we're going to have you take the screen as we cover the last few questions and things to do here. So okay. Sharon had been patiently waiting because she asked this question at the top of the hour, but can you show us how to add sections or lessons into a chapter that she's created?
Sure. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to snag a copy of Math 8 here. This is my kind of private account. So what I'm going to do is just go under Choose. I'm going to Customize. And now I have my own version of this Middle School Math 8 book in my own account. And what I can do, there's a number of ways to add content. The easiest way, of course, is to just, when you have a given chapter, to just choose the material that you're looking for. You can either create a new written lesson and add all those neat resources to them, or you can search CK12 and just find whatever it is you're wanting to to add to your book. We can choose a specific written lesson here called Slope. I can preview it if I want. When I know that it's the one I want, I click Add to Flexbook Textbook. It's going to add at the end of the list of options here, and then I just take the little four-way arrow here and drag it up into the chapter I wanted in. There's that new 2.8 slope lesson right there, and I can shuffle it around within the lesson. Now, I will say, as someone that does this a lot, it can be a little bit finicky as far as trying to make sure that it knows you want something that goes into a given chapter instead of making it a chapter of its own. See here where I just let go in between the two there, I added a new chapter 2. But generally speaking, once you get it added to a specific chapter, it's much easier to shuffle it around within that chapter. Now that I have it in as 2.7, it's easy to shuffle around within there and set it where I want. So I generally just try and add it somewhere down near the bottom of the rest of the existing lessons and then shuffle it as a second step. But it's pretty easy. Just choose the content you want, drag it in there, and then put it in the position that you want it in under whatever chapter you like. If you need to add a new chapter to your book for whatever content you want to bring in, maybe it doesn't belong in something that's already there, you want a new set of materials, you can just choose new chapter, give it a title, save the chapter, and now I have a new kind of subheading here that I can drop new lessons into. And I can even take existing lessons and move them down there if I want. Oops. And add them into that new lesson or new chapter at the bottom.
Yeah. So Laramie, there is a question here. If you want to add, for example, a 2.10 or 2.11, can you show how you create a new read and it puts it at the bottom of the list and then you drag it up into the chapter where you want it?
Yeah, sure. So again, if I go over here, I'll just do new read instead of adding content like I did a minute ago. If I do new read, it's going to kind of give me a blank slate here. We're going to call this will be next chapter 2 lesson. How about that? I'm going to save that. We're just going to put a little gobbledygook in there, save it as a draft. And now you'll notice it ends up clear down here at the bottom. It thinks by default that it's the next thing at the end of the book. So what I need to do is open up the chapter I want to put it in and then drag it up there using that four-way arrow, drop it anywhere in chapter 8, and then shuffle until it's where I wanted it in that chapter. So in this case, there were already 2.1 through 2.8. It added 2.9 by putting it onto the end of that list.
Alrighty, Laramie, one last thing here. Can you show us by going down to the bottom of the page, you can access the Common Core books? Because if people want to share one URL with a friend, yeah, just go ahead and click on that. And then, yeah, you're in the middle of editing. So this is the page we would love you to share with other people. You can go up to the top now, copy that URL and say, hey, check out CK12's great Common Core books. And even for your friends that don't speak Common Core, it is still, these are our flagship math products. And as Laramie said, we've got Math 7 coming in a few weeks. And by mid-August, we have the Math 6 for the full kind of compendium of resources for middle school and high school. And pre-calc is coming on its way too, Laramie says. So much great content that we want you to share with, with other people that you know. Share it, tweet it out, share it in your networks, because this is the way that you can help us by getting more and more people to do that. All right, Laramie, thank you so much for all the great information today. We've really appreciated it. Is it supposed to be 100 degrees in Colorado this weekend, like so many other parts of the United States?
Yes, absolutely. It was over 100 degrees yesterday. In fact, I looked at my outdoor thermostat, and it was 99 degrees at dark last night after the sun went down. It's just been blistering hot. So I feel for all of you others out there and pretty much anywhere in the eastern United States these days. It's been really, really hot.
Yeah, it's crazy. New York and Washington both are going to be 100 this weekend. So our thoughts are with everybody. Stay cool. We're going to hit a high of 80 degrees here in Palo Alto, not to brag. The heat dome is not covering us here. So we'll work hard this weekend as we begin to process all the information that's been gone over in the last 2 weeks of the Certified Educator Program. Reminder to you, besides the 5 live sessions, you will be doing a follow-up beyond CEP program sessions. So make sure that you do that last session and get certified, because we'd love to see as many people get certified as possible. And maybe when it's so hot outside this weekend, it'd be nice to stay in the air conditioning and finish up your program. So from all of us here, we thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon on Teaching Strategies using CK12. Thanks so much.